Hello y'all on YouTube, this is Rob with Rob's Nerdy Knives. Today I have a very interesting Rob's Rambling. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about knife warranties and when you get a knife, how it's covered and what those warranties are like and some of the things that are challenges, right? So sometimes you get a knife and it's got an incredible warranty. For instance, if I grab real quick my Benchmade knife it's got probably, I'm going to say, one of the best warranties in the business, right? You call them up, no matter how old a knife is, you can bring in a Benchmade and it'll be covered, right? They will take care of it, they'll redo it, they'll resharpen it, they'll clean it out, everything, and it is taken care of. It's like a lifetime warranty, and it's probably, from everybody I've spoken to, one of the best warranties in the business. So, a lot of respect to those guys for that. Then you have Spyderco. As long as you do nothing to your Spyderco is really great with their warranties. But of course, like this right here, this is Mannix. I put new scales on here. This is Mannix 2. I put a new Flytanium cage ball lock in here, right? And I took out, it's linerless, so there's no liners in here. So relatively, everything is relatively new except for the screws and the blade, right? Technically, under Spyderco's warranty, this would no longer be covered, no matter what, even if it was defective, maybe heat treat or something on here. And that's just kind of how they are. Like if the cage ball, that's plastic, broke with the original, they would cover it, but you can't take it apart. You're not supposed to be doing anything with it. So their warranty is a little exclusive. Now, I get it, because so many people, when you get a Spyderco, I think every Spyderco I have, I've modified. I don't think I have one Spyderco that was never modified. So I can understand that to some point. If you take it and you put it back exactly as it was and there's some issue with it, I'm sure Spyderco is really good about that. But their warranty is because they know what people do with their knives. And if you modify and do really crazy things, reprofile a blade, how can they cover that? That's a challenge. I think that is definitely a challenge. And then you have some knives that are made by manufacturers like Riot that made these two guys. Riot does an outstanding job. This is Sharp by Design knife made by Brian Nadeau, who's awesome designer. He's the one who does Sharp by Design. He does a lot of custom knives. Fantastic knife. Now, I will tell you, I don't know the exact warranty, and I don't know if it's lifetime or what, but if you reach out to the guy, he's really great about things, if it's truly a warranty issue. But if it's because you beat up your knife, you pried something, you broke something, you carried it into a metal shop and you got nothing but metal inside of it, or right, you left it in salt water for 5 years. There's things that I'm pretty sure that would not be covered. But if you carried this knife, didn't hardly anything, and let's say the scale popped out, I'm sure Brian could help you. Now the thing is, he makes a lot of these custom, so he could fix a lot of these things custom, right? But he's just a nice guy. He takes care of people, and especially his products. He really cares. So there's that. Now, I don't know exactly what his warranty states, but I know people are just quality like that. McNeese is the same way. McNeese knives, USA made, but I can tell you, this guy is just simply outstanding. Every time anybody's had any sort of anything happen, which is rare, but when it does, he is all over it. For instance, there was a guy I know, his knife, for whatever reason, didn't center. He put in skiff washers. Guy sent him to McNeese. McNeese fixed it, took care of it. Didn't pay, and was covered under warranty. I had some issues with mine. Mine was real dirty at first, and I wasn't sure if I was going to keep it, and I had some problems, and I called him, spoke to him, I guess, or in instant message, and then we talked, and he said if I took it apart and I cleaned it out, and if it still wasn't what I wanted it to be, he would take it and he would work on it, which I thought was amazing. I mean, that guy's just outstanding. Jonathan McNeese, if you can get a Mac 2, 3.5 or 3.0, you can get any of his knives, you should get it. Even the auto or the manual. Absolutely outstanding person, right? But it was just great to know how well he would take care of it. And there's a reason. It's a really quality USA made knife. Devo Knives. I know Kevin and Colin, both of those guys are really outstanding people. And I know they would take care of you too. But, this is made by Best Tech, this particular knife. You have to deal with that, right? They don't have the manufacturing facility, and if they have the parts, they can do something, they will take care of you and try to fix it to the best of their ability. But there comes a point when, depending on your use or abuse or whatever, there's things I think that are reasonable, and I think things that are unreasonable. Then you have something like this, the Chavez. And that's an expensive knife. It's Riot made, heavy duty. But again, if you do something to the knife, a lot of times I think you have to work with the distributor. I don't know who you would contact with Chavez if you needed warranty work on there. But again, the quality and the build is so intrinsically designed that it's rare that you would need anything. But just some of these guys are just really outstanding to work with. But then you have some knives and some manufacturers who, you get a knife from and they give you a 1-year warranty and that's it. Now, granted, in that 1 year, you should figure out if you're carrying the knife and using the knife, some things would come to fruition. Now, some people who've maybe not had great experiences, but I don't know. I don't know everybody's circumstance. The old saying is there's always three sides to a story, right? There's your side, their side, and the real story in the middle. And I don't always see every angle. And the reality is, my side could be incomplete. What I see may not be the whole picture. And that's something you have to consider when you look at something like that. And some of these guys, they have to stay in business. There's so much that they can do and they want to do, and they always want to make sure that you love their products and and everything. But there's sometimes when they won't do that. I know some people have complained about one particular manufacturer they've had some issues with, but every time I've reached out to this particular manufacturer, I want to mention it because my experience has been great. This person has been fantastic, and I don't have anything negative to say. Even if there's a particular design I didn't care for at times, which is fine, and I've been honest about it. They were fine with it, but there's one of their designs that I absolutely love. It's one of my favorite knives, right? But I've had nothing but great experience. But I was reasonable when I spoke to them about certain things, right? And I also, when I got the knife, I immediately checked it out and saw there were some issues with it, and they were really good about that. So I was very excited. I feel like it's a matter of respect and reasonable knife user and using your knife and looking at it and what you're expecting. If you've never bought a really nice knife and you go spend, $200, $300, $400 on a knife and you get it and, you expect it like to be no imperfections, like for instance, when they're polishing the edge there and there's like a little mark you can see, but that's just from the sandstone or whatever that's polishing it. It's not going to look perfectly uniform, but that's just how edges are sharpened. It's fine. Some people will be like, oh, that doesn't look perfect. They might, because this is stone wash, they might think, oh, there's like a little, you can see a little reflection right there. Well, it's stone washed. It's going to be in a machine that's rolling stone, sandstone all around it to give it that unique finish and everything. And that's part of the design of that. And some people, they don't like that. Whatever, just like the atomic wash. If you wanted it perfectly pristine and polished, don't get an atomic wash. I love the atomic wash, by the way. It's like, not only does it look like it's stone washed, but it looks like it could take, an atomic beating. That's what I love. And I love this very design. I think it's awesome, right? But those are, I think, reasonable and then unreasonable expectations, right? So now I get it. For some people, they've never spent a whole lot of money on knives. And when you do have an issue, you get a brand new knife and you do have a problem with it, you want to be able to reach out to them and ask them for help. Now, the challenge is going to be for some people is, how do you get the help? How do you communicate what the issue is? And how effectively do you do that? You can call them up and say, well, your knife sucks, it's broken. Yeah, that's probably not a good way to start a conversation, right? You can say, hey, I got a knife and this happened. Is it supposed to be like this? And maybe provide some pictures, a video, whatever. That would be always my recommendation. Say, I really like this knife and I don't know what's going on here. I had recently one knife from a manufacturer where I bought this really expensive clip and it wasn't, I think the heat treat wasn't right and I sent it back. They were totally cool about it. But in the process, that clip didn't fit correctly in two knives. I tried it in two different knives and it sort of stripped the screws, and they sent me screw replacements. They were really great. But I explained to them exactly what happened. I showed them the video. I was like, here's some pictures. Let me show you. And I was really trying to explain to them and say, I really like this, but this is not going to work if I have a knife that's $400 or $500 worth of knife in my pocket. I got to be able to trust it. It's got to be reliable. I got to be able to make sure that the knife's not going to fall out of my pocket, right? And so they were great, but I think that comes from also maybe knowing how to communicate some of those things. And I get some people don't always know that. And so that's challenging, right? That's tough. And I think if you're in that boat and you're not sure and you're, maybe ask around, ask the knife community, ask me, you can ask other folks in the comments and stuff like that. If you ever have such a situation, who do you talk to? How do you talk to them? What do you say? And I think if you understand that. It'll really help you out. I don't want you to feel like you're in a boat all by yourself, you know. You can ask questions. Is this reasonable for me to ask? You know, sometimes they are. Sometimes they're very reasonable questions. Sometimes they're not, right? Sometimes if you're a person who's OCD and you buy a knife and it has one little imperfect, you know, like right there, and you see that nick and that right to you means it's defective, I got to return it. It's atomic wash. That's going to be everywhere, right? So if you're expecting something out of atomic wash, then you might want to consider a different knife, different manufacturer, or you might just want to consider buying a full custom and spending the $5,000 to $10,000 on that knife if you really need that, right? Even nicer knives, more expensive knives, you're still going to have, there's always going to be something not absolutely 100% perfect. And what I mean by that is not that it's defective, not that it's off-centered necessarily. And even then, you know, if a knife's off-center, there's an easy way to center a knife. There are really, really easy way. And sometimes off-centering occurs maybe in shipment, a pivot screw is loose, you just need to tighten it. You know, maybe when it was assembled, it didn't seat correctly, and so if you're comfortable, you take it apart, you put it back together, it seats perfectly. Maybe you just need to learn how to center a blade. Like if you use your knife a lot and you were cutting something heavy and it was pulling a lot of force on it, and when you close it, now it's a little off center, you can center that back. There's little tricks to do that, but that was from use, right? You did that. It's not defective. It just means you used your knife maybe in a way you shouldn't have. Maybe you leveraged it instead of cutting, instead of going down, you went to an angle and you caused some things to happen. Those things happen, but there's fixes for that. Doesn't mean the knife is ruined. It's the end of the world for it. But if you get a knife that comes in and let's say, and I actually had this happen, one of the screws just came right off. Or a screw was missing. People are really good. The knife retailer I went to, I bought this really nice all blacked out knife. It was missing one of the 2 screws in the clip, and it had a clip like this. And imagine if one of these screws right here was missing, it would totally rotate, and it's blacked out. And if it rotated, now the screw was hidden inside, but if it rotated, it would have scratched all that black out and it would have just totally ruined it. And I happened to notice it because, you know, I do unboxings, and even before I did unboxings, I always inspected. I looked inside, I looked to the side, I made sure I felt the knife, I wanted to see the action, I wanted to feel the opening and closing it. Is it gritty? Is it smooth? You know, different things. Looked in, you know, is it centered? I checked out, you know, how well does it lock up? Is this centered? You know, I looked at all these different things, and I looked inside and I said, oh, there's no screws. I wonder where it is. Oh, I looked inside. Oh, there's a screw, and I see one screw and the other one has no screw. And I'm like, wait, what? So I got my flashlight and looked at it and go, it's missing a screw. And then I looked, is it recessed in so it's still holding it? No, it's not. It's laying on top. So it would move around. It was just really tight and didn't move. But if I were to carry it, I would totally have ruined it, right? So for me, knowing that you can't really get a replacement screw for something that's made by Riot overseas, I don't think they would have replacement screws for it. I shipped it back because they didn't have it in the exact same version I could replace it with, which I would have considered, right? And most knife retailers are really good about that. They would replace it for you and they would be fine with that. They just didn't have another one that I wanted. And that particular knife, I really liked the blacked out version, and that's all I wanted. I didn't care for any of the other ones. So I just returned it. They were cool about it. They ended up reselling it, you know, for the missing screw and say, hey, it's missing a screw. If you're willing to find a screw or deal with it, here's a discount. And, you know, somebody bought it because it's a great deal. And if you're a person who has lots of knives and you have parts and you're really good and you have extra screws, you might have just gone, oh yeah, I got extra screw. I know exactly what will fit that. It's perfect, no problem, right? I typically don't have lots of extra hardware and screws. I don't work on knives like, you know, manufacture them, assemble them or something like that. I'm not a modder. I don't do any of that stuff. You know, I may have extra washers because I put in skiffs. I may have extra clip parts because maybe I put a new, like I put a Spyderco clip on here, but I wouldn't have any extra screws for these. I would have to get those from the manufacturer, right? In this case, I might have some extra screws for this this Benchmade, because I took this apart. I've never ever had it happen, but I broke an Omega spring. But I took this apart quite a few times. I was tuning it a lot. And I think when I put it back together, it wasn't really all together. And I think that's what broke my Omega spring. So let's call it my fault. But I was able to buy some Omega springs out of Austin, which is real close to where I live. And they were a little tighter, which made it really nice action for you know, an axis lock, able lock, crossbar lock, whatever you want to call it. But this is the axis lock. That's what Benchmade calls it, right? Really, really great action. But I lost my blade stop pin. It fell on the floor here and still have yet to find it. I suspect one day when I move things around, I'm going to find it, or it went underneath one of my floorboards off to the side. And if I ever ran a magnet, maybe I could pull it out. I don't know. I'm sure it's somewhere, but it's just, I could never find it. So I had to buy some parts, and third-party parts to get that in there. And it was a little, like probably a micro nanometer or whatever, a couple of nanometers tighter in there, and so when it closed, it was a little tighter, and the action was a lot harder, and it didn't have the drop shut that I had at first. Now it does again because I've broken it back in and really worked it through, and it's perfect, right? But it was just ever so slight that the action wasn't quite the same, and I was bummed. Now, I called up Benchmade, and they said, yeah, sure, you can ship it back. I had to ship the whole knife, and I'd have to pay for the shipping there and back, and for the cost of an Omega spring, and then the cost of getting the little part for that, to me, it was a lot cheaper if I just put it in, and I did. I paid for it, and it worked perfectly fine for me. But I do know that they would have taken it, they would have fixed it, they would have, probably put the new Benchmade stop pin in there, they put another Omega spring in there, and I would have shipped it back and probably resharpened it, and it would have been fine. But I like it. I want it to work on this the way it is. I really like the way this knife is, and I didn't want to have to ship it in or anything, so I was happy with it. I think this is perfectly fine. But it's good to know Benchmade would have taken care of that. But I did stuff to it. So to me, I felt like it would have been reasonable for them to charge me for that. But even though I know they wouldn't, but they still would have made me pay for the shipping, which in some way makes me, do I really want them to work on it, right? That's kind of their way to say, if you're willing to pay for the shipping, then you're probably willing to take care of their warranty work, right? Now, they will say if they find out some of these knives are counterfeits, they won't send that back to you, and they'll let you know. Now, I bought these all from known retailers, so I know this is genuine Benchmade. I don't like to buy off of weird sites. I like to buy off of very well-known retailers that I know about. And so everything, I feel confident in what I own, or I buy directly from the person who made the knife, right? I would buy a Sharp by Design directly from Brian Nadeau. I bought the McNeese. I would buy it from Jonathan McNeese. I'd buy the Devo from Lefty EDC and Colin, the two guys, Kevin and Colin, who worked together on that. Chavez, if he had a website, I'd buy there. I bought a Pena X Series knife from, that was a collab with Javi Garcia, which is, I believe, used to be Enrique Pena's protege, worked for him and everything, worked under him and studied under him or whatever. He is now a fantastic knife designer. His stuff is, I love his aesthetics are really beautiful, and I think they complement one another. They did a collab called the Alacran. I bought it directly from him. So, there you go. You can do that. Now, warranties are also things that, that you have to, I would always say to folks, if you're going to do warranty, it's got to be, I think, and this is not for everybody, right? For people who have legitimate issues, you should be able to go to the person and say, hey, there's a problem. And I think a reasonable time for that, right? If you've had the knife for, if they say they have a lifetime warranty, then it's for the lifetime. And if it's a reasonable defect, I think it's reasonable to reach out to them. I don't think it would be reasonable to say, I've had this knife for 10 years, it got rusted, I was prying something, somebody else took this knife and they did something with the knife or what have you, and let's see here. Yeah, I was able to reverse flick this once in a while. But anyways, they were doing something they shouldn't have been doing with it. Can you cover it? I don't think that's reasonable, right? But if you had it for within a year and you were using it, and I was just flipping it, and all of a sudden, a screw just fell out because it was stripped, and it wasn't loose, you didn't hear any rattling, you didn't see it sticking out, it just fell out. Or suddenly the knife just bends really weird, for whatever reason. Like, let's say they had the heat treat and it bowed, and then they treated it to go straight, and then over time the blade just starts curving back. And so I don't know if you know, in heat treat, sometimes depending on when you anneal it and you do the oil wash or the bath or whatever, it can warp the blade, and there's things they do to straighten it out. But sometimes over time, sometimes the metal is already aligned in a way it can start to bow back. And if they didn't fix that correctly, and if it was done, to circumvent it, the manufacturer, let's say they outsourced it to someone. I don't know. I've never seen that with Bestech or Riot, but let's say another manufacturer did that and that happened. I think it would be reasonable to say, hey, I've had this knife for 6 months and the blade's starting to just curve on me, and all I do is carry it, open it, I open boxes, I open letters. I haven't done any hard use whatsoever on it. You can even see there's no wear on there. That's kind of weird, and I think someone who's making knives, if they're continuing to do that, they would be like, yeah, that is weird, because they would want to know, because if they're working with a manufacturer and they did some shortcuts, they'd want to be able to address that quickly with them, get credit back, or get it fixed, right? So I think those are reasonable sorts of thoughts when you deal with them, right? But I think if you have a legitimate warranty, I think it's reasonable to expect them to take care of reasonable things. And I think it's reasonable to ask reasonable questions. But I think you also have to know what you should expect in that. you know, I always say a knife is a knife. It's a tool, but it's a knife. It's meant to cut. It's not a pry bar, right? It's not a hammer. You don't want to hammer things. It's not an axe. It's not meant to go out there and whack trees with, right? It's a knife. It's meant to cut. And if you're doing reasonable things with a knife, I think it's reasonable. If you're in a metal shop, you know, and you're getting all sorts of stuff inside of it and you don't take it apart and clean it, you know, I think that's unreasonable. If you don't maintain your knife, if you don't keep it clean, you don't take care of it, you don't oil it, whatever, take it apart and clean it as you need to. If you're going to do hard use on a knife, you should know how to take care of it. It's just like if you have a really nice drill, you want to know how to take care of that. You have a really nice tool. Like if you have a car, would you get a car and then never change the oil? Would you have a car and never change the transmission fluid? Would you never change the tires, replace your brakes? Would you never, change the brake fluid? Would you never, the things that you would do on a car that are managing things that are maintenance, right? You want to be able to do that with your knives. I think that's reasonable. And then, some manufacturers know that people do a lot harder use things on them than maybe other people would, and that's fine, right? But I think there are some who may not have a good warranty as well, maybe because they're a small business and they don't do a whole lot of knives. And so I think when you buy something like that, you need to keep that in mind. Are you willing to take? It's a cool design, you love it. They're a small business. They may not be able to support that long term, and they may not have a long term like lifetime warranty. If you love it and you're okay with that, then buy it. But if you're not okay with that, you need to think about that. Okay? And if you're not in the US and you're out of country, what is the process of working on a return or getting some help with it? How do you reach out to them? I would never just say, oh, this is not broken, I'm just going to ship it to Chavez. I'm just going to ship it to him. I find his website and, oh, there's an address, I'm just going to ship it. If he doesn't know who's from, what's going on, you might as well just be giving away the knife, right? I mean, they don't know what it is if they don't have any sort of information. For instance, I had an issue with a Chris Reeve knife, my Umnumzan. I wanted to get it glass bead blasted. It was sandblasted, and when I did that, I had to do a whole process. You fill out the form, you tell them what you want, you do the payment ahead of time if you wanted extra, or if it was covered on warranty, you would just tell them what's going on, and you would provide the shipping tracking, all that is a good process, and it worked. And so when they get it, they know, because they have a lot of volume coming in and out. They know what to do. I think it would be unreasonable to do that with anybody else. That's just my thoughts on there. I know if you're in another country, that makes it difficult, and there's challenges for shipping. I get that, but you also have to think about, some of these guys, they're smaller businesses. If they have to ship somewhere where it's going to cost them $70-80 or something, that could be their entire profit on a knife that they sold. And you could be, if this goes back and forth because someone doesn't like something on there, that could be legit, maybe not legit, but you have to consider that. You have to consider their cost, and you have to consider their business model. Benchmade makes a lot of knives. They sell a lot of knives. They have a really strong warranty, but they also have a volume to support all of that and the revenue to support all of that, right? Some places don't. And, I think that's some questions you have to ask. But in the end, I think it's very, very, very reasonable to ask for, I think it's very absolutely reasonable to ask for them to honor their warranty, to do what is necessary, and for them to fix what's wrong in a reasonable time. I absolutely do. Now, if you are in a place where, their normal domestic shipping is not covered, I think you have to be reasonably expect to pay for that. And I think that's something you would need to be willing to do, especially if you buy, someone does, yeah, I'll ship to USA back, no problem. But if you're in some country where it's going to cost $70, $100 to ship, I think you need to be willing to pay for that, because you already bought a knife that's typically not within the USA, right? And a lot of times there's a lot of knives they won't send out of the country. For instance, on my giveaways, I never ship outside the USA. Everything is only shipped in the USA. You could be somewhere else, and as long as I'm shipping to the USA, if that's your address in the USA, I'll ship to that address. But I'm not going to ship outside of the USA just for legal reasons, and I just don't want to deal with that. If you win, you have to adhere to your local and state and local knife laws. So that's how I follow it. But I can only imagine when you're dealing with knives, because I know there's all sorts of legality in manufacturing and all sorts of stuff. So that's kind of where I stand on that. What do you all think? What are your thoughts on this? I mean, I know some of you will absolutely disagree with me, and you probably will have a good case for it. So I'd love to hear that, because that's how we discuss things. That's how we think, because you probably bring something up and I'll be like, yeah, I hadn't thought of that. I think that's reasonable. Or you say something and I'm going, well, you know, I hear you. I understand what you're saying, but I don't know if that's necessarily reasonable in overall sense, but I do respect it, right? So we can always agree to disagree. We can share some stories. Maybe we learn something from one another, or maybe we just, we find out that, you know, you might think I'm an idiot, which is fine, right? You know, that's okay. I'm okay with that. You don't have to agree with me. You really don't. That's the joy of this knife community. We can disagree on styles, ergonomics, aesthetics, things that are out there. It's perfectly fine. And we're all big boys. We can handle it, you know. It's okay, right? That's the joy. That's the point of a Rob's Rambling, is to talk about this. I'm rambling. I'm rambling my thoughts. You don't have to agree with me. You can ramble right back at me and say, I don't agree, and tell me why. Because I would actually like to hear that. I really do. I like hearing that from people. I like hearing your thoughts. And I do try to reply to the comments down below, just so you know. That's just kind of where I stand. So again, love to hear from you. If you have any ideas for these sorts of Rob's Ramblings, give me some more ideas. Some of these ideas came from you guys, and I wanted to kind of discuss them because I think they're awesome. And if you have any questions about this or future knives, reviews, anything, let me know. I would love to hear from you. Again, I appreciate you watching. If you're listening this far, thank you. I always like to share my thoughts on this and love to hear your thoughts. So that's really cool. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, would you consider hitting the like button down below? And if you've already hit that like button, would you consider hitting the subscribe button? Subscribing and liking my videos really helps out the channel. It allows me to produce more content, do more things. So thank you. Thank you for that. If you've already done the subscribing, maybe consider hitting the notification button also as well. It'll help you be notified of future content when it drops. And if you've done all of that, maybe check me out over on Instagram. Again, on Instagram at Robs_nerdy_knives. Again, that's on Instagram, if I can talk, at Robs_nerdy_knives. Hey, thanks so much for watching today. Have a great day and a great week. Bye.